So anyway, the essays I asked Irina to distribute ahead of time for this morning's session are only tangentially related to what I'll be talking about today. So I hope if you did read them that they trigger some ideas on how it might be possible to move through the idea of art as research, not just beyond negative critique, but to begin to dismantle the theory-practice binary per se by thinking about broaching the possibility of thinking through making and thinking through doing, and the thinking that goes into and prepares you to make and do in a way that might be adequate to your intention. To think about the potential for art practice, collaborative or otherwise, as action and action research. I should add that those readings and the substance of what I'll be talking about today are also only tangentially related to the critique of creative industries' boosterism within urban generation neoliberal policy and planning circles that forms the central focus for this workshop. Instead, what I consider in those essays is the question of creativity in general, how creativity per se figures and how its generative machinations might be tracked and understood, for instance, in the discussion of the nature of improvisation and its valorization or sacralization within what Daniel Belgrad called the US mid-20th century culture of spontaneity. That was one essay that I put out there called Even Unto Death, Improvisation, Edging and Enframement, or how creativity might be valorized, stimulated and sustained in learning environments via the kinds of curricular innovations and interdisciplinary programmatic initiatives I describe on critical arts pedagogy in the essay called Thinking Through Making. I'm just referencing those because I'm not going to talk about them directly. About those essays, all the initiatives described in that latter article, which really referred to the time when I was Dean of Critical Studies at California Institute of the Arts. Though I do want to describe a couple of projects we initiated at the IHC, the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center, and UCIRA, the University of California Institute for Research in the Arts, during my tenure at UC Santa Barbara over the past 7 years, and the principles and paradigms and objectives that underpinned those initiatives in the first part of this talk. So UCIRA, IHC, UCSB, UCR, you can see I've become a UC SPRAC kind of bureaucrat. It's one of the conditions of induction that you speak like this, I think. What I'd like to do right now, however, is point out how routinely the creative labour, the critically creative industry we bring to bear as teachers and administrators on the institutions in which we work tends to get downplayed and sidelined in the kind of theoretically informed, politically nuanced, critical theory kind of focused academic seminar setting that we're in here at the Institute. I'm not knocking this, I'm just saying that there are certain things that tend to fall out of what is easy or even possible sometimes to talk about and talk through. In fact, I think the kind of potentially transformative institutional work we do as administrators and teachers can get overlooked and marginalised here as readily as the potentially transfigurative critical work of art itself can get overlooked and marginalised in logocentric contexts. As readily, by the way, even sometimes more readily, in an academic humanities as in a scientific or social scientific setting. A point I think Lisa may well be making this afternoon. Either way, as someone committed absolutely to an ethos of perversity, when people ask me what I'm working on, openings or, receptions and so on in conferences, instead of mumbling about some half-baked research trajectory I've been toying with or some long overdue article I've yet to deliver, I tend to invoke the administrative job title I'm currently labouring under. And I'd like to think I do so not because I'm sort of delusionally cathected onto some fantasy of institutional power or even of institutional effectiveness. I never really think of programming or curriculum stroke pedagogical innovation as building anything, even quasi-permanent, more as a series of interventions, invitations and interruptions. But because I do that because admin work and programming has been what for the past 16 years or so since I came to the States, I spent most of my time doing and getting paid for. So from 2001 till last month, in response to that question, what you're working on, I'd say I'm directing the IHC, the Interdisciplinary Humanities Centre at UC Santa Barbara, and from 2005 till last month, I'd add I'm also co-director with Kim Yasuda, a fellow faculty member from the art department of UCIRA, the University of California Institute for Research in the Arts. Usually the eyes of the person asking the question will glaze over at this point and they'll say yes, but what are you really working on? What about your own work? In the second half of this talk, I'm going to capitulate and defer to that request to bracket what I actually do in my working life for most of the time by endeavouring to go back to my own work in that sort of individuated monographical sense that for now at least still dominates and defines the academic humanities. In fact, I want to go right back in the second part of this talk to the early work I did on subculture, the work in the end, I'm realistic, that got me here, that got me out of the UK art school, out of the twilight economy precariat, into the professionalised, admin-savvy US tenured professoriate. And I'll attempt to do a symptomatic read in an updated 30 years on version of the spirit animating the original take I took on 70s UK punk of the 21st century Japanese otaku subculture as filtered to the work of contemporary Japanese art star Takashi Murakami, the work that Toby mentioned, hopefully in a way that bears some relation to questions raised about the culture industry's problematic. Now I apologise to those colleagues in UC Santa Barbara who've seen versions of this talk, but at least there's lots of things I hope to look at, and it's a bit kind of more maybe immediately compelling and flashy at least than me droning on about institutional change and whatever. But I do want to take some time to actually honour the people I work with at UC Santa Barbara, who work in that tireless, dedicated, self-exploiting way that Andrew Ross said that a lot of creative labourers work, even though some of them are tenured professors, and who still struggle to get their colleagues to count what they do, which I think is extraordinarily important and brilliant, combining research and teaching through art. Do you want me to what? Stick this in my face or something? Oh, I got the one. To get that considered when they come up for tenure or promotion, and that's a real issue, I think, to get this kind of work, not this kind of connection between art practice and creative pedagogy acknowledged for what it is, basically maybe trying to transmit usable, transferable skills to the budding precariat, but also trying to change the institution so that it's a place that we actually want to live and work in, rather than subsist in for 9 months so we can do our real work in the 3 months of the summer. So I want to talk a little bit about that work. And I should describe what the IHC is, give it a kind of, I could show images, but I'm scared that I'll lose my PowerPoint. And I've only just mastered PowerPoint. I'm a real slow learner when it comes to technologies, and I've been hauling slides and boom boxes around now for about 30 years. I've only just stopped doing that. So if it goes wrong, I hope you bear with me. But you probably won't. The IHC is housed on 1 and a bit floors of the Humanities and Social Science building. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of rooms, reception room, a seminar room, and a conference room, and offices, and a couple of offices in the floor, on the floor downstairs at UCSB. Despite the interdisciplinary qualifier, we provide support, or they provide support now for single discipline as well as interdisciplinary research in the arts, humanities and humanistic social sciences. The Centre currently sponsors multiple faculty and grad student interdisciplinary research groups 19 of them currently, where faculty and students from at least 2, preferably 3 departments get together to work on new interdisciplinary fields of inquiry on topics as diverse as regional studies like African studies, East Asian studies, East European studies, topic-centred things like culture, gender and aesthetics, Mediterranean lament traditions, human-animal relationships, and torture in the future, which Lisa is heading up. It accommodates various long-term research projects and centres, including the Centre for Work, Labour and Democracy, the Centre for Cold War Studies, the Centre for Medieval Studies, and the Centre for Film, TV and New Media at the moment, which Connie heads up. So there's a lot of colleagues in the room for me, people I've worked with or admired their work whilst working at the centre. It administers a year-long artist in residence programme and a year-long film screening, theatre, music, spoken word, dance, publication and visual arts programme called IV Live, that's directed at providing an alternative supplement or intelligent foil to the headless party scene that's come to define the Isla Vista student ghetto, situated directly adjacent to the Santa Barbara campus. So we have our missionary work to do too through the IHC. In addition, it sponsors, co-sponsors, promotes and or hosts in its conference room around 20 to 40 public events a month, conferences, symposia, lecture series. And through its faculty advisory board, it distributes around 100 grand a year in research funding to faculty and graduate students. So that's quite a lot. I'm not saying I was directly involved in all of it, but I was involved in enough of the projects for it to take up a lot of my time. In 2005, the IHC became the host to a parasite potentially much larger than itself, when the system-wide Institute for Research in the Arts, a multi-campus research unit, conceived at one time, long before it got hit by serial budget cuts and a failure of political will and imagination by the powers that be. It was originally conceived as the arts equivalent of this distinguished humanities research institute. It's much smaller in scale at the moment. The UCIRA board, which comprises artists and arts administrators from both inside and outside the UC system, gets to distribute $100,000, exactly the same sum the IHC re-grants for arts and humanities research on the UCSB campus alone, across all 9 UC campuses. So that's what we get to sort of seed new art and art-centred scholarship across all 9 campuses, the same amount of money we get just on one campus for interdisciplinary humanities research. Sorry? 9. Yeah, I said 9, yeah. No, not 10. It's 10, is it? Yeah. What about San Francisco? That doesn't have one. Yeah, but San Francisco doesn't have an art, does it? Yeah. San Francisco doesn't have an art program. That's why. That's why it's 9. Okay. I can do math too. Look at that. Yeah, Merced. I'm all power. So seeding and sponsoring new work in the visual, performing and media arts and in arts pedagogy. If you want to look at any of this, go on the internet for www.ucira.ucsb.edu, and it's got descriptions of many of the projects, all the projects that we funded and granting categories and all that stuff. Since its arrival at UCSB, UCIRA has pushed what I think can still be meaningfully described, despite the threadbare nature of this kind of rhetoric within the arts, as an innovative agenda of arts research and new pedagogy that prioritises collaboration, partnership with external communities and for-profit as well as non-profit organisations, residency programmes, action research, including undergraduate action research grants, which means working in real-world settings with communities and organisations and institutions on problems that are mutually defined by faculty, students and clients, and new approaches to teaching, the latter through a new grant category called What Would You Do With $5,000, which we managed to kind of squeeze out of this budget, which is designed to sponsor projects that do some of the following, to quote from our literature design, test and implement innovative curricular initiatives, recognise critical thinking as the source and opening of the artwork and not merely the place of a post-mortem evaluation, appreciation or interpretation of the completed work, promote action research and research in action models of collaborative interdisciplinary arts practice, capable of working transitively in and on real-world settings outside conventional studio, gallery and performance contexts. Though we do still, fund and sponsor and support traditional work and even new work that's done within traditional genres or settings, we are trying to push for this art as social action idea. Mainly, to a large extent, for the demonstration projects completed on our own campus under Kim Yasuda's inspired leadership. So, but give a couple of examples of the kinds of classes that we've sponsored in this category. There was a project called Uncanny, which was led by Matthias Geiger from the art department at UC Davis, designed to excavate and expose the architectural agricultural history of the Davis area. They took over or occupied a former fruit canning factory for several days immediately prior to its demolition, did a lot of research on the history of the building and history of that sector. And then over a weekend occupied the space continuously and used the place as a platform and a site for improvised social interaction, exhibitions and performances directly, indirectly, or not connected at all to the research that they'd done in preparation for entering the building. So they had DJs, dancers, magicians, musicians, visual artists, fire spinners, spoken word performance, lectures, all going on inside this space. And a lot of the interventionist kind of stuff that we sponsor is about creating space or redefining spaces, recycling spaces, reinventing spaces, or exposing and making manifest the repressed history of space uses. Taking inspiration from the Centre for Land Use Interpretation, places like that, and the work of people like Andrea Zittel. Brett Stallbaum of UC San Diego ran a class called Interventionist Art, Social Design and Cultural Change, where you got undergraduate students to use cell phones and GPS systems to map the uses of spaces on and off campus, and then to devise interventionist art strategies for disrupting and temporarily transforming the social scripting of those spaces. E.g., I remember in one piece, a student stands on the roof of the UCSD art building yelling the words, "Art is research," and the piece ends when, a baffled pedestrian looks directly up at her, then she'll stop. It's actually on YouTube, that one. The grant category itself was established to extend throughout the system the model of pedagogical innovation introduced by Kim Yasuda in a class entitled Open Container, taught initially in the spring of 2005, in which, building on a partnership established with a local shipping container company, J. Stall Storage, Kim, myself and a recent MFA grad student, Robert Weschler, and a group of students from across campus. We don't have an architectural design department, so it was mainly artists, but some people from environmental science and some consultants from engineering, I believe, over the course of more than a year, in consultation with an array of contractors, roofers, vendors and architects, including San Francisco-based John Peterson of Peterson Architects and the 1% Solution. He's trying to get all architectural practices to do, give 1%. For pro bono work, doing sort of social architecture and affordable architecture and so on. And Brian Bell of North Carolina-based Design Corps, another interesting group, which is modelled on the Peace Corps, sending out art and design students into places like New Orleans to work with people on developing affordable housing, working in the Central Valley to develop temporary kind of restroom and living quarters for agricultural labourers, stuff like that. And Rural Studio, which is based in Auburn University, Alabama, we've also got a partnership with, who developed this Rural Studio program of developing scavenge architecture to make innovative and often beautiful structures out of recycled and donated materials to house and provide community facilities for some of the poorest communities in the state, sharecropping families in Alabama and Mississippi. Now we've been trying to import that model to Santa Barbara, the wealthiest, the place where the housing market goes through the roof, where it's a real problem for retention to get people to get junior faculty, even senior faculty, to move from Nebraska to Santa Barbara is almost impossible. So, we've run design barracks and consultations with these people, where we've invited the Vice Chancellor and other members of the senior administration and housing activists to talk about creative solutions to the affordable housing problem in Santa Barbara, where the median house price is $1 million. So this is the kind of creative friction that we try to, leverage this position and these resources to really start to change the way in which people think about what might be done at home, even, literally in the spaces we and our students and our junior colleagues occupy, to raise critical questions, but also possibly to provide templates for a different way of inhabiting space. So anyway, together, Kim and Robert, with me as a kind of conceptual input content provider or whatever, the useless one really, cut and welded 2 donated shipping containers into a single habitable structure using recycled, scavenged and basement price materials to make it, novel furniture and fittings. The structure is currently being brought up to code and will be installed on West Campus as a temporary replacement art studio for recently demolished facilities. Demolished because I think they found asbestos in them. So that's going to be, a practical solution to our studio, a shortfall, but also, and more importantly, demonstrating what you can do if you try to think constructively about what can be done. We're teaching and research to actually work on real-world issues. Another faculty member, Jane Mulfinger, ran a class with the recent art grad Billy Hood, in which they worked with a group of students to convert a third donated container into a mobile arts lab with an sort of extrudable metal exhibition drawing screening space. I mean, it can be transported, intact, and then you pull this thing out and it becomes double the length, and you've got a screen, a projection booth, and a 6-room classroom in this thing. It's circulated among a lot of the high schools in the area, and it's been in constant use. The box was moved to the rear of the downtown Santa Barbara Museum of Art to coincide with the museum's contemporary Chinese photography exhibition on view in the summer of 2006. A curated exhibit inside the container entitled Labour Exchange extended the main show's themes by focusing on issues of labour, commodities supply chains and consumption, containing works by 6 current grad students and 2 established artists who were commissioned to make works from materials purchased at dollar stores and Walmarts. They were given $100 each and told to, so they bought plastic boxes and trays and made artworks out of those, all stuff made in China. A screening of David Redmond's film Mardi Gras Made in China, which Lisa screened yesterday, I believe, took place in the container's micro-theatre to bring the economic and cultural anomalies and contradictions of supply chain dynamics home to the exhibition viewer. So that's the kind of way in which we try to, exploit existing exhibition opportunities and then to give a slightly critical content, plus an opportunity for our students to show work in public context. Other initiatives going out of the ongoing container project at UCSB included a conference held in November of last year entitled The Travelling Box, Containers as the Global Icon of Our Era. The conference, organised approximately 50 years after the launch of the first containerised ship, explored the social, economic, ecological and cultural impact of the shipping container and containerisation. It's kind of commonly said that globalisation relied on the invention of the computer, but the computer in a sense was there to oversee the logistics of moving shipping containers around the world. The shipping container, as Mark Levinson contends, is the engine for globalization, and it's often overlooked because it's just old-fashioned maritime trade, which has been absolutely revolutionized, of course, by containerization. So that's another thing that we think art can do, is draw attention to the mundane, overlooked, structural changes that are making globalization possible, and then playing with that process of making manifest. The conference brought together longshoremen, representatives of longshoremen's unions, logistics and port authority personnel, transport historians, sociologists, geographers, architects and artists working with adapted containers, and a representative from the RAND Corporation specialising in homeland security issues. It doesn't mean everybody spoke the same language. In fact, it was in many ways an exercise in non-communication, but it was an interesting exercise in non-communication. And when the book finally comes out, all those tensions and fissures between these different interest groups and disciplinary languages will be exposed. And the book itself will bind them together in a kind of happy friction. The conference included a series of special events, including keynote addresses by Mark Levinson, author of the book The Box, How Shipping Container Made the World Smaller and the World Economy Bigger, and architect Jennifer Siegel of the LA-based Office of Mobile Design. And there was also a screening of the film Lottery of the Sea, which is set in the Barcelona docks largely, with a Q&A by photography and filmmaker Alan Sekula from CalArts. He's a noted documentarian and analyst of containerization and has been pursuing this topic across many art projects, including Fish Story, a photo documentation piece which has been featured at all the major art biennials in the 90s. The conference also included a tour of the sculpture yard containing the modified containers, and what we call rather cheesily a ballet of the box, which was performed in a cleared UCSB car park in which Jürgen Stahl, the owner of the J. Stahl storage company, demonstrated during a conference break how 3 40-foot containers could be stacked one on top of the other using just a standard forklift. It was like a circus piece, actually. The maneuver was at one point quite hair-raising and had the added value of producing some unanticipated and quite radical tree pruning, but fortunately no one was hurt, and physical facilities didn't witness this violation of the flora. The conference served as a platform for announcing a competition called Open Up the Box, in which amateur and professional architect designers were invited to convert 2 more donated containers into affordable housing, and more practical than our project, which was more of an art thing. So really to look for a practical modular form of way of adapting containers. Because of course, as I always say, shipping containers are the 3-dimensional modular monument to the trade deficit. We import all this stuff and we don't export anything. So they're stacking up in LA docks, often in these really poor and transit areas, blocking out the sun. They're a health hazard. They are places that kids play in that can be dangerous. They're infested with rats, and they're rusting all over the place. And so many architects are interested in trying to use this material to do something with it. So the proposal, so the idea is to get proposals for building attractive, inexpensive, functional and eco-friendly structures that could be manufactured. And that's really why Jürgen Stahl is interested in collaborating with us, because he wants to develop this and patent some modular housing from it. The proposals, we got about 10, 12 proposals eventually. We hope for more, but were exhibited along with architectural models, maquettes and explanatory panels in the local downtown library. So that's really as far as I've got with this institutional stuff, but I just wanted to indicate that that's the kind of work that can go on over years, and I see it as a form of action research. And in itself, this interest in containerization was initially provoked by an art exhibit at the University Art Museum by the avant-garde design and architecture group Low-Tech, in which they'd taken a standardized shipping container and converted it into what they called a mobile dwelling unit, which was then on exhibition in the campus. And at that point, the IHC, a number of faculty in the IHC, including Lisa Parks, we got together and came up with a proposal to do a whole bunch of programming around this exhibit, using this big exhibit as a Trojan horse to get all these questions raised about habitat, sustainability, security, borders, all that stuff. So we called the series Home Free, Liberty, Security in the 21st Century American Habitat. We used it to, around that we had three conferences, one on the history of mobile and portable architecture, one on sustainable architecture, and one on the Patriot Act. See, that's how, so you can move, we take the initial catalyst, it's like a stone that you throw in to a pond, and then you try and see how many connections you can make and how much reverberation across the campus you can stealthily introduce using this mysterious object as the material catalyst. We had a number of classes taught around the MDU. I taught a class in architectural design in the College of Creative Studies with the curator of the Art Museum. And we had a series of screenings and talks by artists and conceptual art outfits like the Centre for Land Use Interpretation, Andrea Zittel, Andrew Wexler and so on, to keep this thing going. Out of that, I think we attracted the attention over the period of that year of labour historian Nelson Lichtenstein, who was also interested in questions of containerisation and so forth. And so we moved from there to organising the first conference on Walmart, which is was one of our splashier conferences, and conferences that actually got quite a lot of attention. And that was where we first brought together people from completely different fields to try and to produce some interdisciplinary critical focus on all these changes. I'm just going to take a breather in a minute, but so the work of the IHC and UCILRA together, I think the idea, one of the priorities I brought into the job when I arrived was to try to change that institutional syntax, which always places the arts at the end of the sentence that goes science, social, in descending order of significance, perceived significance, and in descending order of access to real resources that goes, science, social science, humanities, and the arts, and try and move the arts up the line to disrupt that institutional syntax. And so that's, I think, how we won the bid to get UCIRA housed at Santa Barbara. And then, from there, once the UCIRA was in our bailiwick, as it were, it became possible to introduce these new categories: action research, collaborative research, and so on, and the Open Classroom Challenge, and try to use those to kickstart new kinds of arts-centered research, and in part to educate our colleagues on campus as to what art is. I mean, a lot of the time people, even in the humanities, sometimes especially in the humanities, think that art is, reducible to a set of practices that, go back to the Renaissance or something. Whereas if you take as your starting point, like 60s conceptual art or critical art, 70s, you can begin, I think, to really intervene in the interdisciplinary research and teaching mission and do something new. And so I think that actually engages the students, because of course the students are accustomed to working on platforms that include visual and audio material. They're used to MySpace and YouTube. They're not used to sitting and listening for more than 20 minutes, let alone 2 weeks. They are not addicted to discourse. They are not particularly discourse happy. Not some of them are, but they shouldn't be the only ones that we take seriously. I think we have to adapt our strategies to accept that, students are going to want to be given materials, and this is the model of teaching that I learned teaching in art schools. I give in intensive information or materials assault, questions assault, and then the students need time to dream on it and to dream it into a shape and give it back to me in a shape that I could never have imagined. So rather than thinking of teaching as, getting the students to parrot back some version, garbled or otherwise, of what you think you've been saying, you give them a set of questions, a set of materials and equipment, and let them come back, dream it, let it suffer a sea change, and let them find their own questions in it. So that's really the way I teach. You could say I'm a lazy pedagogue. But either way, I think partly what we're trying to do is imagine what the university of the future might begin to look like and how it might operate as, a teaching learning laboratory in I'm not saying a post-literate age, but in an age where, different kinds of literacy are likely to emerge and prevail, hybrid literacies and so forth. So one of the jobs of UCIRA is to advocate for the arts, to educate people about what art might be, what it might do, what it could be released, the obligations it might be released from, to be decorative and beautiful and so on, in order for it to become a more active, dynamic and transitive kind of component in and set of resources and strategies, and also to advocate for the arts in a more conventional way for the state. So, 9 campuses, hundreds of, often highly accomplished and distinguished arts faculty working in the system. If you put it all together, we've got quite an amazing, probably unmatched resource, and we need to, I think, take it seriously and use it and kind of assemble it in a way that makes it more effective. In terms of arts advocacy, this is what we do. This is one of the charges we were given, and I'm going to just resort for a little moment to a description of some of the figures about California. If you look at art policy reports for California, we get the same depressing numbers. While California has one of the largest concentrations of arts and arts-related industries in the world, think for starters, entertainment, gaming and software development, with some 90,000 arts-related businesses giving employment to more than 500,000 people. And while non-profit arts organizations in California generate some $5.4 billion to the state's economy, create more than 160,000 jobs and generate nearly $300 million in state and local taxes, nonetheless, state and federal money forthcoming for the arts statewide is at its lowest level in decades, with funding for the California Arts Council slashed 5 years ago to $1.1 0.01 million from a $32 million high at one point. So that, as Alma Robinson, Executive Director of California Lawyers for the Arts, pointed out in her keynote speech at the first State of the Arts conference held in Santa Barbara in 2005, that means that the California Art Council gets just 3 cents per person per year from the state, which puts us at the bottom of the National League, below Mississippi, the District of Columbia, and Guam. However, as Alma also made clear, for those figures to resonate properly and have meaningful impact, they have to be sewn into a narrative and a vision capable of moving beyond lament into the persuasive winning hearts and minds mode. And I think that's what we're trying to do. When you, as everybody who's in the arts knows, you put 2, 3 artists together in a room and they're going to complain about the fact that shrinking resources, soaring student numbers, systematic underfunding, a general ambient lack of understanding of what we do, recognition and support from more mainstream quarters. But nobody listens to somebody whining. So what we try to do, particularly in the State of the Arts Conference, which is held every year on a different campus, is to bring together all some of the what we feel, we curate it almost like an art show. We get some of the most interesting people working in the arts, some of the most interesting arts projects, not all of them sponsored by UCIRA, but a couple of them sponsored by UCIRA, and then put them together in panels, get people in panels. The people are asked to keep their presentations short, sharp, content heavy, and very specific. We avoid general questions, what is art, and all that stuff. And people go dive in and say, this is what I've been doing with food, say, biodiversity in food. This is what we've been doing with the border arts. Teddy Cruz and people from San Diego always have amazing projects where they're actually, working on and across the border with Tijuana. Getting all these mapping, these new media mapping projects, mapping the wilderness, classes that are being held simultaneously in parts of India and UC San Diego using electronic technologies to connect these disparate and very disjunct communities. And we just sort of put that all together. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of press at the moment. And we have a lot of art performances and receptions and parties as well, because we recognise that art is sensuous knowledge. We should be enjoying ourselves. We shouldn't just be sitting there listening. And we believe, one of our slogans, that the conference should be, like all learning experiences, immersive as well as discursive. That's one of our kind of slogans, and we hope it's fun. And it's taking place in November 6th to 9th, I think, in Riverside this year, both on the campus and at the new Arts Block arts facility in downtown Riverside. So do come, to the and see what the UC's up to in terms of new arts research and arts pedagogy. I don't know what to do at this point. I was going to segue into the next part, which is very different. This is the performance-y part. But do people want to have breakout sessions? I was thinking about this breakout session. We could send you out to climb trees. See if you could climb a tree on campus and not get arrested. Or, take cell phone photographs of people using cell phones and laptops. Or go and do an audit of the commercial facilities in the university centre. What's the ratio of knowledge, commodities to clothing, to fitness, to, I was just thinking that at this point, you probably need some fresh air and, move. I'm not going to get into one of these, let's all kind of, it's not one of